Hey everybody, Phil/Polygoing here. Welcome to the first installment in what might become an ongoing informal series, Throwback Thursdays. Looking to the past, man. I'm a big fan of roots in the historical context, origin story sense of the word. And I thought it'd be really fun to take a look at some big franchises, iconic series in games, and see where they came from, see where we came from. Just talking nostalgia, talking difficulty, talking the pulse of the time, and just make an ass of myself doing some retro gaming with games from back in the day that I haven't touched in upwards of 30 years. Castlevania, here we go. Alright, man, let me talk about this a little bit, especially about the gameplay going on in the background that you're going to see. Now, my goal with this is to make it a very casual, very chill, fun, nostalgia series. Well, I hope it's fun. Fun is a little presumptuous, Poly. But as mentioned, I have not played these games in a long time. I think the last time I played Castlevania was circa 1989 on the Nintendo, right before I traded everything in for a Super Nintendo, shortly before. So, I mean, that's upwards of 30 years ago. 30 years is a lot of dust to blow off of a controller. You're not going to see MLG top tier play. This is not a tutorial series. This is me picking something up that I have vague, foggy recollections of and remember fondly. Outside of that, man, I don't remember a damn thing. There's going to be a whole lot of goofballery. There's going to be a whole lot of noob stuff happening. And I think that's part of the fun. That's part of the charm. It's just a little preemptive strike before anybody jumps on me in the first 2 minutes of the video. Dude, you missed this item. Dude, you suck at Castlevania. Yes, I did, and yes, I do. Okay, we'll do some nuts and bolts. We'll run down the details of this thing just to be thorough. Ready? Here we go. Castlevania was released in 1987 on the Nintendo Entertainment System by Konami. So 87, man, back on the NES. I think this is kind of where Konami showed up to the US console market. They had track and field on the Nintendo, which was fun. It was great in the arcades with a buddy especially as just a manic button masher, jumping hurdles and chucking javelins and shit like that. It was a lot of fun, but it wasn't a huge hit. I think Castlevania is kind of where Konami arrived and people started noticing. With Castlevania, that's where Konami started to mean something in my childhood brain. It actually predates, Castlevania predates Contra. It predates Metal Gear. And thinking back on it, just kind of remembering the time, I found that a little bit odd. If stopped on the street and pressed, hey, which came out first, Castlevania or Contra? I would have said Contra, because I played Contra first. So I will say, going into this, I did a little bit of, just a tiny bit of research to look stuff up and make sure I had my dates right-ish and my details correct-ish. Because memories, childhood memories of this era, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, are a little bit foggy and follow kind of a disjointed timeline. First tangent, just as an interesting thing. Back in the day, you know, the hype machine around game development is not nearly what it was now. Game culture was not nearly as big as it is now. And finding out about games was much more of a walled garden type thing. Just you and your friends chilling on the playground. Hey, have you played this? No. Have you played this? No. Or going into your local toy store and seeing what games are on the shelves. You know, the internet was not a thing. Trade publications were not really a thing until a couple of years later. And so you didn't have this hype machine to let you know what games were coming down the pike, you know, months down the way in development, years down the way in development. Games just kind of showed up. I have much more well-formed memories of when I played games versus when games were released. You know, I'd find out about stuff from talking to friends or find out about stuff when I'd read about it in Nintendo Power when it was a game that has been released and is being reviewed or showcased in a strategy guide or tips and tricks and all that kind of thing. It wasn't so much like hype for these games that are yet to be released. Be ready when they do and run out and buy them day one. You know, Super Mario Bros. 3 was a big exception to that. It had dumb shit movies made about it, and everybody was looking forward to that. But for the most part, it was just kind of when you got your hands on a game is when that game showed up on your radar. The release of the game was much less of an event. That might be an isolated, you know, single experience of mine. I can't speak for everybody that was around. Maybe people were following sort of insider trade publications to keep an eye on what's happening overseas and stuff like that. I wasn't. I was just a dumb kid playing games. Okay, and we just took out our first boss. as well. Didn't seem too hard. I will definitely talk about the difficulty of this game down the way. But with the help of my trusty battle axe, we took out the giant bats. Seems pretty logical. If you're out hunting vampires, just as we are in the world of Castlevania, you're bound to come across some giant vampiric bats who are looking to suck your blood or eat your flesh or feast upon whatever it is giant vampiric bats feast upon. I mentioned the axe though, let's segue into weapons. Starting with the main, you've got your character, Simon Belmont, comes from a long line of vampire hunters, living in the shadow of his ancestors a little bit, and looking to prove himself. The curse of Dracula comes up once again and falls to Simon to go stop it. I don't know why you would choose a whip as your main if you're thinking, okay, I gotta go kill vampires. Let me grab my whip. Maybe that just happens to be what he used. Maybe it runs in the family. I don't know. But as a thing, it still seems pretty interesting to this day. The whip is a really underutilized main weapon for a lot of characters in all games. You know, most of the time you've got a sword, you've got a gun, you've got some sort of magic spell or whatnot. The whip is kind of underrepresented, and I find that pretty interesting, and it's one of the things that makes Castlevania so memorable. Regarding the mechanics of that whip, man, oof, it starts off pretty weak. It starts off as just a basic leather whip. Short range, not very powerful. You can power it up pretty quickly. It turns into this nice little chain whip that I've got here with the spiked head at the end of it. Does a lot more damage, gets a lot more range. But that whip, throwing it out there, is a commitment, man. You cannot change directions while whipping. You cannot move or jump or run while whipping. You throw it out there and you have to wait for the entire attack animation to complete before you can do anything else. On top of that, it has a pretty long ramp-up time. Every time I throw that out there, you can see it goes behind him a little bit. Once it starts moving forward, that's where your attack actually starts. You do not have an instant attack. If there's a dude right up in your face and you try to attack him, you are going to get hit because he'll come in contact with you before your whip can extend. As a result of that, the ramp-up time of the whip and the commitment of having it just hang out there in the air for several frames, the gameplay and the combat of Castlevania has a very, very distinctive feel. You definitely have to use range to your advantage with this whip because you can't get right up on people and spam that thing. It's not very fast swinging. It is meant to be used from afar. It is meant to be, right there is a great example of it. It is meant to hit enemies from about medium range. You don't want dudes up in your grill. You can't handle dudes up in your grill. The combat also takes on a very precise rhythmical quality to it as well, because of the way that you have to time your attacks. You have to be very strategic about where you swing and where you start your whips in the middle of a jump to get it to go off at the peak or to get it to go off when you come down if you're trying to hit guys in odd locations. The run and gun approach definitely does not work in Castlevania, and I actually really like that. That's one of the things I'm probably most rusty with coming back to this game. I had a vague memory of that, but once you experience it after having been out of it for a long time, or if you're not familiar with Castlevania and you go back and play it, it will immediately hit you. Something else will probably immediately hit you and do a lot of damage because enemies hit hard in this game. But that's one of the first things you really notice is sort of the timing and the rhythm of attacking in this game. I think that's pretty cool. It's really challenging to get used to if you're used to games where you can spam attacks, right? If you've got a sword, something like Strider, where you run up to an enemy and you can just like spam, swing as fast as you can, and it almost like stuns the enemy and pauses them. They can't move, and you can basically stun lock them into infinity as long as you're quick enough on the trigger. That is not how Simon Belmont takes care of his business. He takes care of his business rhythmically, slowly, precisely, from medium range. Oh my god, I think I burned through an entire stack of lives trying to deal with these stupid elevators because they're one-shot kills, and I'm still getting used to sort of the size of pixels and the precise little movements, sort of where the hitboxes are, where Simon's head is, and, you know, I try to get close to these things a couple too many times, or think, you know, I can make it underneath there, and nope, just a single giant pixel collision, and these things will take you down. Like, trying to get this heart was the He just bumped his head and depletes his entire health bar. And there we go. There's game 1. We'll go ahead and continue and pick up where we left off. We'll try that again, see if I have some more success with it. They're not elevators. I called them elevators a second ago. I guess they're little, I don't know. Crush you evaders. But yeah, in addition to the whip and sort of the in my opinion, really fun mechanics of getting used to that thing and sort of the distinctive feel it lends to the way you attack in Castlevania. Monsieur Belmont, also, he's not French. Probably, what, Romanian? Off hunting vampires. Simon also has some side weapons that he could pick up. I took out that bat with the, let me call out this ghost, man. These guys are such bitches because they are meant to fuck with you and your whip's weaknesses. Those will chase you down and get all up on the inside your sprite, and you cannot hit them. Like, if something is on top of you, you cannot hit it with your whip. So you have to use your invincibility frames, run away, get some distance, turn around, and then hit those things. The game is full of stuff like that. The game definitely realizes your weaknesses with that whip. But Simon also has his supplementary weapons. I think there's 5 of them in the game. There's the boomerang, which I've got now. There's a dagger that's a ranged projectile, fairly weak, but goes across the entire screen. You've got some holy water. You've got a stopwatch, which freezes time on all enemies for a little bit. And then you've got your battle axe, which is sort of a powerful arcing weapon. That's what I use to take down that boss bat. And using those side arms depletes your hearts. That's why I keep bothering to pick up all these goofy little hearts. That's actually allowing me to use more of my boomerang. So you have a finite use of those things. It's a system very reminiscent of like Ghosts and Goblins, or a lot of other games have picked that up as well. Got another boss here, Medusa Head. I could not remember for the life of me the pattern or how to beat this person. So I basically I had a pretty full health bar. I'm just going to spam, take the hits, and just whack away. I'm sure there's a much more elegant way to do this. I don't remember it. I'll try it on subsequent playthroughs, but she's not too bad with whip, 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 boomerang, boomerang, boomerang. Yay! Another boss down. You know, speaking of elegant ways to do things, a lot of the bosses in this game, they're very, very pattern-driven. You're kind of expected to die a couple times until you figure things out, and then you can take them out with ease on the next time and just kind of make progressive progress. There's definitely a trial and error element in this game. Unless you come across a boss like I just did and play incredibly sloppy and basically just try to survive longer than she can, do more DPS than she can. She doesn't really hit that hard. I had a decent health bar, and I got weapons at my disposal, so I'm just going to try and outlast. Most of the time, there is a trial and error component. Let's talk about the difficulty of this game, because it kind of ties in. A lot of these games from back in the day, the NES games like Ninja Gaiden and Castlevania, I remember them being very, very difficult. Coming back to them now, it's like they're even fucking harder than I remember. I have no idea how I was able to do this stuff as a kid. You know, it's all about patience. It's all about learning the levels and learning the attack patterns of enemies and kind of figuring out how to manipulate a lot of that stuff too. If you get a character off screen, if you get an enemy off screen, they'll disappear. They might respawn when you go back, but this game is meant to kill you and meant to make you continue and play through it time and time and time again to figure it out. I think a lot of that makes sense. It's knockback. It's got a huge knockback on your character too, so if you take a hit, you are probably going to fall off of a ledge. But I mean, the size of these games from back in the day on NES cartridges were not very big. Ninja Gaiden is not a long game if you play through it start to finish. Castlevania is not a long game start to finish. So the difficulty makes a lot of sense in terms of the value and replayability of the game. If you were completely a master of Castlevania, you could probably burn through this thing in about 20 minutes. Like, it would just be a very quick run. It's not super long, and if you know everything there is to know, you don't have to puzzle your way through anything or figure anything out. It's pretty short. The difficulty comes in terms of making you come back. You have to figure it out. You have to get to that point when you master all of the mechanics and all of the levels and you have enemy placements memorized and stuff like that. It becomes a breeze. And the sense of accomplishment you get from overcoming situations, like, you know, going in and dying and having to continue and burning through all of your continues, and then you have to play through the entire game again up to that point just to give it another shot. Finally overcoming that feels amazing. And that'll stick with you. I'm not going to say forever, because clearly I'm not remembering all the stuff that I could do as a kid, but it'll come back. Dark Souls, gets a lot of credit for that style of game design. It's fairly unforgiving, but for the most part fair. And it gets a lot of props for being so unique in this era of gaming. It kind of is. Back in the day, man, most games were like this. Most games, like these 2D side-scrollers, were very, very short. But they were brutally difficult. You could not, go through this thing in an afternoon on your first playthrough. You had to die time and time again and figure things out and say, that approach didn't work. Let me try a different strategy. Now, a lot of my strategy this time around, too, is sort of use my invincibility frames and know when to puss out. But it's kind of cool. I think that's kind of cool. The progressive knowledge you get. Getting deep into the game, being able to get deep into the game because you've played through the beginning so many times, having to play back to that point, in an era of not being able to save anywhere. No auto saves. You have a fixed number of lives and a fixed number of continues, and when those are gone, you start over, period. And I think that's kind of cool. Every time you play through the game, you're building more experience, you're building more skill, you're getting more familiar with your weird-ass whip main weapon and the way that this game feels and plays. And, like those first two levels, with the exception of the Medusa boss, I did okay on them. If I have to play back to but I'm struggling like hell in this section. And so when I have to play back here, those beginning levels are not that big a deal. And I'm going to come back here and continue to play through this and die and fail and learn. And then this will be no problem, and I'll probably struggle like hell on the next section. Repeat, 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 until eventually you can just play through the game start to finish in a very chill, casual experience. So with games like this, a lot of people like to say, oh, Castlevania wasn't that hard. Oh, Ninja Gaiden wasn't that hard. Oh, Dark Souls wasn't that hard. Just slap that person in the mouth. Like, that is not true. It may not be hard for them now, but they died and struggled a lot to get to that point. This is not the kind of game that you can just breeze through. You must build up a poison resistance to it. Just like Wesley in The Princess Bride, slowly building up his resistance to iocane powder, and now it ain't no thing. You're slowly building up your knowledge in Castlevania, and someday it won't be a thing. Maybe don't slap them. I don't want to encourage violence, but don't believe them either. Nobody breezed through Castlevania their first time. Nobody breezed through Dark Souls without dying their first time, right? One last thing to point out, too. Despite the name, this is not a Metroidvania. This is absolutely linear. It wasn't until the sequel, Simon's Quest, that Castlevania started to go in the direction of backtracking and finding items and unlocking previous areas that were inaccessible with your starting character. But we'll probably take a look at Simon's Quest in a similar exploration video commentary type thing. For now, that's all I got with Castlevania, man. It was an absolute blast. Nostalgic blast from the past to go back and play this thing again. If you've never played it, check it out. Know where you came from, especially if you're a fan of the more modern iterations, Lords of Shadow, or any of the stuff on the PS1 especially. Symphony of the Night. Woo! Yeah, man, Castlevania is great. Let me know your thoughts. Hit me up with any kind of comments, feedback. Always welcome. Check out the podcast. Let me know what you think of the series, too. Should we do more of these? This was fun for me. All right, see you guys soon.